everyone. Welcome to the Better People podcast. I'm Margaret Urick.
And I'm Holly DePalma.
So, Holly, it's almost the end of the year.
I know, it's insane. It's absolutely insane.
Crazy. But what I love to do right at this time is really reflect back. I think that's what the end of the year gives us, is this great opportunity to think back.
For sure.
And I think because I personally just had COVID, I can't help but think back to 2019, right? To the end, to December 2019, before the world changed for all of us. Where it was just a blip on the radar, and you maybe heard about it, right? If you follow the news. So what are your thoughts? Like when you think back to 2019 and the end and what was coming, what occurs for you?
Yeah, it's funny because if you think about that time, like the economy was insanely strong. The business lines that you and I both run were crazy. And we always do a year in review for our board. And so looking at that was just this I think I actually did break my arm for patting myself on the back so hard after 2019. And then so this sort of weirdness started to happen, and then 2020 rolls around and some places start closing. And I was actually, I had really expanded in 2019 into New York. Yeah. And I was in New York the day that the lawyer came in from New Rochelle on the train, and people were kind of walking around New York like in this haze. And I made my own hand sanitizer for the subway. It was surreal. And I remember I was speaking at one of my clients' board meetings, and somebody said, I was about to speak, and somebody said, can we just talk a little bit? Are you prepared if this happens? And that and they were like, oh yeah. It was almost like, oh, we're fine. And we had no idea what was happening. Right. And I hearken back to that time, and we were at this precipice of so much change for everyone, and particularly HR leaders, right? Like HR leaders, man, they caught the brunt. And kids, of course, but let's not go there. So imagine being an HR leader and starting a brand new job with essentially a brand new company with 1,000 people right as this is happening.
Yeah. With a brand new pandemic. Wow.
I don't know that we all knew what a pandemic even really was, other than, movies.
Right.
So, and I'm certainly, I'm not trying to make light of this even a little bit. This was a huge challenge for so many reasons, both personally and professionally. But, focusing on the professional, I'm really excited to talk to our guest today, Becky O'Loughlin, who is the Chief People Officer and Executive Vice President at Amplity Health. And she did just that. She started a job as the leader of human resources at an organization in December of 2019. And I'm looking forward to hearing sort of about her experiences and her look back. And I think it's going to be a great show. Hi, Becky. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Holly. Good to see you.
Yeah, great to see you again. I remember when we met, and it was at the HR Person of the Year Awards in 2022, and I showed up. I'd actually never been to the awards before, and I showed up, and you walked in the room, and somebody was like, "Oh, there's Becky O'Loughlin. Like, she's a rock star. And so much fun. You have to meet her." And I was thrilled to meet you, and super obviously impressed with your previous HR Person of the Year Award standings. So Thank you for agreeing to join us on our podcast today. And Becky is the Chief People Officer and EVP at Amplity Health. And you started at Amplity at a really interesting time.
I did.
Yeah, you want to tell us about that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'll take the fun part of your introduction. The rock star piece I'm not so sure about, but that was a very fun evening. The team puts on a great event for that, and it's a lot of fun to get that group of people together every year. So I appreciate it. I joined Amplity Health 3 years ago. So it was in December of 2019. And I got 2.5 months into the organization and the world changed, which we all remember well. It's where were you on, March 16th or whatever it was. Amplity was going through changes. They had just established themselves as Amplity Health 6 months before I joined, through a divestiture. So there were a number of things the organization had that were well established in terms of business process and, operation, but there was a lot of things through the divestiture that needed to be reestablished. So, as you can imagine, I came in, I wanted to assess what their needs were from a total people strategy, had a really great game plan, a lot of great momentum in those first 2 months of 2020. And then March hit, and it just kind of changed the dynamic of the whole of the organization. And, important to say, my background prior to Amplity Health, I worked for, large retail organization, global, a lot of resources. And I was coming into an organization of about 2,000 people, much different in terms of, scale, much different in terms of, budget and resources. So, we're private equity held. And so all of that was a learning, and particularly in light of COVID. And a few months later, George Floyd's murder, another, devastating event, and one that as an organization, everyone felt compelled to respond to in some way. And I was in an organization that had nothing set up for communication, for engagement, nothing in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we were, kind of baseline, 0.0 in terms of figuring that out. And so, there's a lot that, we've done and that we had to do, at that time, in response to that. And I know, your audience is, really folks that work in smaller organizations, and, just really thinking about that and reflecting on the learnings I personally had, but then also thinking about what we were able to do and accomplish basically with no money, just out of, kind of pure, fierce spirit and intent and desire and passion to want to do the right thing and do it well. There was a lot that, there's a lot we needed to do around that. And we did, we had to, like everyone did, that was, quite a year for anyone that worked in any capacity and in an HR function in particular. And there was a lot there that we had to contend with and lean into.
Yeah. So Becky, Holly and I were talking at the beginning of the show about the opportunity that the year end presents you, right? And it's this opportunity to reflect back. And you already acknowledged, right, as you reflect back on what happened. So I'm just curious, with that reflection, what would you say are you most proud of? Like, what is, because you talked about, right, you just had to do things, you had to get things done. When you look back on that, I guess, what's the one thing that makes you most proud?
I think of something, and it's not small, but it was, it signified done. So I remember, and at that time, and obviously this was a couple of years ago, certainly the work and the effort that we did there carried forward, and that, there was a lot of momentum around that, and certainly laid the foundation for, work that we'd done to follow. But at that time, I remember doing a survey for, everyone was remote, like, how's everybody doing? And it was just a quick survey to say, like, how is this working? What else do you need? How do you feel? Can you be successful? Whatever. How do you think we, Amplity Health, are responding to, to this crisis? And I remember the response for that question was through the roof. I mean, it was whatever it was on a scale of 1 to 10, it was tens, or, 1 to 5, it was fives. And the comments in the survey were, so proud to work for this company. I remember reading the survey, and it was the first one we did, and thinking, wait, what have we actually done? And when I thought about it, all we had done was reach out and really engage on a very human level. And then honestly, that carries us through in everything that we do in the organization. And at that point in particular was so poignant to what was happening. And just that reflection of, that's all people want. People just, we're just all humans. We just all want to do well. We want to show up every day and feel like we work in an environment where people care, genuinely care, and want to interact with people and want to do the right thing. And that's what that moment was, kind of in reflection. I often think back on that because I was really befuddled. I'm like, I don't really understand what we've done. Because in my mind, especially coming from such a large organization, it was always about these, big programs and, big communication and big deliverables that went out. And I don't know, you boil it down and people just want you to engage them for who they are and where they are. And that's
so
what
Becky,
that was about.
I love that, because that is just being so human and not being policy driven or somebody. But how did that happen? Was it instinctual that your leaders knew to do that? Was it a plan? How did it happen?
I think it was a little bit of both. There's one, if I think about like some of the even just communications that we were crafting at that time, they were like letters you'd write to a family member. And it was just, we just from the start, we're like, we just got to write from our heart, like what we're thinking and feeling, what our intent is, for the organization. So it was a little bit of that. It was also it was a plan. We started to quickly pull things together. Like I said, we didn't really have anything to connect people. At that point, there were no communication mechanisms. So really quickly, we put in place, monthly all hands meetings that were very informal. We kind of lean into formal informality or informal formality. And these were just forums to get together to talk about things that were happening in the business, but the whole company to just join in, big Q&A, all leaders would participate, everyone would, kind of jump in. We also started to put together, we had it's like an employee newsletter or magazine, if you will. And we didn't have anything like that. And it was very purposeful. It wasn't business updates. It was just about the team. And it was just, recognition. It was highlighting, certain events. It was, really kind of an engagement mechanism where people could share pictures. A lot of folks did, all of our Zoom pictures working from home with our animals and our kids and, whatever other chaos was happening at the time. So we certainly did that. And, there was also, I would say, from an engagement perspective, when I joined the company, they had an annual engagement survey. They'd contracted with someone, but we quickly worked with that partner to do more frequent pulse checks. So we just kind of shifted gears a little bit with that, and then really leaned into the leaders to kind of have their own engagement plan and strategy with their teams. So working with the leaders to make sure that everyone was kind of following, almost a certain formula. Again, it's not hugely scientific, nothing, crazy, but just roundtables, skip level meetings, holding on to those one-on-ones, giving them, just some like tips and, sharing the memes and doing all of that at that point. And a lot of that we still are using and employing today. Those same kind of expectations are there in terms of company engagement and communication, but also at the leader and manager level.
I'm going to say something. I know you want to, Holly, but real quick. So what I'm hearing, I mean, it almost sounds like this, what happened, right? What you had to react to, right? COVID and everything that it required an organization to do. With a new organization like yours, it also gave you this opportunity to really create a neat culture, right? Yeah. Because by doing all of these things, you created a culture that's really working for you now, it sounds like.
Yes, absolutely. And, one of the reasons I joined the organization was because they'd only been through the divestiture for, a number of months. By the time I joined, they already had defined a set of values and put in place an engagement survey to test themselves against those values. I'm like, okay, this is obviously an organization that takes this seriously. But what it gave us the opportunity to do is create the proof points against the values we defined. So to that point, it had been, what's the company direction and vision? Again, just from a timing perspective and where the company was. But the way we engaged and again, kind of were able to create those proof points that, was almost pressure tested. Like, okay, is this how you're really going to show up? You put it, you put the words in a poster or, on the wall or on our, intranet, whatever. But is this how we're actually going to show up? Yeah, and we did. We did. Yeah.
One of the sort of challenges, or not challenges, but sort of one of the processes of an HR leader is to gain the trust of the leadership team and the employees, right? And we had a recent guest on our show who talked about that relationship build and the time and how you putting in the effort for that. It sounds like certainly in your case, there wasn't time to build that relationship and to sort of create that bond of trust. It sounded, talk a little bit about that, about how did that play into the challenges, the human capital challenges that your company was being faced with a new leader in the space?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if I've really thought much about that before. I think what comes to mind for me is, one, there was such a need at that time. Like, I think that would be different if Amplity Health was playing over right now as opposed to at that particular point in time, because there was such a need for leadership in the people space. So I think that trust was almost instantaneous, because everyone was just looking like, somebody tell us what should we do? How should we navigate this? What should it look like? So there was just it was a crisis in some ways and a sense of urgency. Fortunately, we soon after March of 2020, we had to go through a period of reduction. Like, we had to work through a reduction in force. And similarly, like, between the reaction to what was happening and then to navigate through a reduction in force at that time. And we were, full scale also trying to remap our strategy, right? Like, our business position at that point was, okay, so we have to make sure that we come out of this faster. So everything from a people perspective, but from a business strategy perspective, we were pulling forward all of our business strategies, things that we had planned and had, planned for in a 3-year plan. All of a sudden we're remapping all of that. So I really think that the element of trust was, one, that leadership that was needed and having kind of the clarity, putting a plan in place, but also knowing from a business strategy perspective that we had to make sure it was tightly aligned and was working together, and both just had to happen at that point. The other thing too, just what you said, trust with the leadership team, but also trust with the organization. That's huge. At the time that I joined, I don't think it just hadn't been HR, the people team hadn't been positioned in a way where they had much of a voice. So to come forward and, a lot for myself and for other members of my team, that putting ourselves out in front of that. So these weren't, communications that were just coming from a empty mailbox. Like, they were coming from me, or they were coming from the leadership team. I think that personalized approach to it made a big difference. And similarly with following George Floyd's murder, and we put together a people strategy. Through that, of course, there was a diversity, equity, and inclusion component. For the year 2020, what we had planned was to have an unconscious bias training session. I think it was like in third quarter or fourth quarter. but we didn't have a stated plan or strategy. So when that transpired, we needed to pull that forward immediately and also with urgency, and have a voice around that as an organization that felt authentic and really wasn't just a reaction because we felt like we had to. And those were probably some of the most compelling conversations I've had in my life, much less my career through that time. We put communications out again with, the same kind of sentiment, how we authored them and expressed them. And it was, again, more kind of from the heart. It wasn't like we had this great strategy to stand behind to say, these are all the things that we're doing. Like, we were in process of establishing that. And, people, it was a really raw time. And people had different reactions to some of what we put out there and had doubts about it. And I had one-on-one conversations with everybody that responded back to that, either in criticism of it or in support of it. And we established a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee at that time. And it was, again, back to the no budget thing, it really was just by sheer interest and passion and intent to, want to do the right thing and make sure that we kind of establish something that would be meaningful to the colleagues of our organization, as well as to the business.
What were some of the things that the diversity, equity, and inclusion committee came up with, like specifics?
Yeah, I mean, we quickly got a group of people together, again, just put it out to the whole organization, whoever wants to be a part of this. It was, that kind of approach. And, we defined, the mission, the pillars of we call the pillars of the committee that we wanted to focus on. We focused on 4 pillars. One was business processes. Another was leadership. Another was culture and awareness. And another was colleague resource groups or employee resource groups. We didn't have any of that. So we did establish 3 colleague resource groups that have done a ton of great work over the past couple of years. We put together different processes for talent acquisition and for vendor selection. Actually, those are the 2 business processes that we knew that we could lean into and, make some changes, kind of immediately. We established a communication calendar, again, around the culture and awareness. And, one of the best things that came out of those were these Ask Me Anything sessions. Again, just, for our Black and African ancestry colleague resource group, they started it, had an Ask Me Anything session, had people submit questions ahead of time, had a panel of, representative team members, join. So questions were put forward ahead, and some of them were, really raw, and but it was a really fantastic and open forum. Nothing was scripted. It was literally just a Zoom meeting. And, the Ask Me Anything was because we really just put it out there. We're just trying to have these conversations and engage with one another, as opposed to, like I said earlier, a big program. And they have been some of the best sessions that we've had as an organization. We did one in celebration of Pride Month this year for the LGBT community, and our women's colleague resource group had a mixed panel for that. And they're again, just these forums, people, they just want to engage and they want to see what their leaders think about these topics that are important, and more than just kind of a program that we're rolling out. We just try to have a great and compelling conversation that feels authentic.
Ask me anything. I'm obsessed.
I love that. And
you can come to the next one.
Can I?
Sure. Yes.
Our listeners are sitting here saying, probably having the same reaction Holly and I did. Like, that sounds so cool. So I do just want to ask you a couple more detailed questions about that.
Please.
If I heard you correctly, you said people submit the questions ahead of time.
Yep.
And then the panelists, do they answer all of the questions? Do they pick what questions they're going to answer?
Sure.
Like,
so the questions, we get some questions ahead of time and encourage questions throughout. There's a facilitator, which conversation. There's a facilitator who has the questions. They share them with the panelists ahead of time, so they're just ready. Again, our direction is, this isn't anything to overly prepare for. Just, show up and, kind of speak your mind and self. Yeah. And so there's not a ton of prep that goes into it, but the facilitator role is important because you kind of want to carry the, thread the conversation through and make sure that you're connecting dots to some of the questions that have come through ahead of time. And then even, in some cases, we have other questions the facilitator either is ready to ask, and then also, kind of directs the questions that come in through the chat and otherwise. And actually, we through the chat and even live. So we kind of opened it up to the whole of the organization. Each of them have had different levels of attendance, and then we record the sessions so that we can post and share them with folks that aren't able to join live. Very simple. I mean, it's literally like scheduling a Zoom meeting and having somebody ready to lead the call. Not more prep than that.
What type of feedback have you gotten from people that have attended? Like, what are people walking away with from these sessions?
Yeah, I mean, each one is different, right? I think often, we get messages that are just, thank you. I'm so proud to work for an organization that will have these real kind of conversations. A lot of appreciation. It literally gives me chills as I say it. A lot of appreciation and thanks for the panelists. Like, they in particular will get, because they're being very, very vulnerable. And if you think about it, you have to have a space where those panelists feel like they can be vulnerable and not feel like there's going to be any, reaction to that, or, that takes a ton of courage. And so getting those few folks that are fearless in that way and are so, passionate about what their experience has been, that they want to share it in whatever way they can, has been really key. And our CEO and, others on the leadership team, their presence in it is really meaningful. Our CEO was actually, we didn't ask me anything for the Women's Colleague Resource Group, and this one was earlier this year, or it was a more recent one, but he was one of the panelists. So it was him and then a few of our female executives, and, just his engagement in that. And again, not scripted, very raw, just telling some of his own experiences, how he views it. That you can't even put a price to what that does from an engagement perspective for people to feel a sense of pride. Pride with, with all of the things that are so difficult in the world and the headlines and, all these impressions that we get, to be in an organization, and you might not be seeing people live, we're still really, more heavily weighted towards remote work, but, those things are so meaningful and create more of a connection and a bond than, walking down a hallway and, having a quick chat with somebody at the water cooler kind of a thing. So really,
this is like mind blowing in the way that my mind is thinking right now. The Gartner Group has put out, a whole list of concerns of, HR concerns, people concerns, and one is around connecting and teaching empathy and et cetera. And it's like you guys had like a crystal ball almost, in that you've already done this. And there's so much to learn from that. It's how do you keep that going? How do you sort of bottle this so that it doesn't sort of be taken for granted, if you will?
Yeah, it's a really great challenge, and it's a real one. It's and again, Margaret, you're saying at the top of this, just kind of that moment of reflection. Every year in any business is going to, in reflection, going to have kind of its story. I'm obviously talking about some of the things that started early in 2020 because of the pandemic, and other events that were happening, but they play forward, the strategy plays forward. I mean, our people strategy, the way that it's stated, I mean, I verbalize it all the time. I don't let people forget like why we have the focus that we do. You know, our intent is that we want to be a high performing team. So our colleagues and our clients choose us time and again, period, the end. The colleagues we serve, the clients we serve, and very intentional that we talk about the colleagues first. And we have, you know, a strategy that supports that, right? And it's like 7 times 7 ways, or 7,000 times 7,000 ways, like as many times as we can remind the organization that this is why we do this is why our values are important. But you do need to kind of keep like fresh eyes to it, because things can get stale. And when it's not the most urgent business issue, like it was in 2020, it's easy for, you know, some of the energy around it to pale in comparison to other things that you're trying to work on. We're, you know, obviously we're talking about our 2023 strategies, and we were talking about our values. And one of my direct reports just got married. So we're having this whole conversation. I'm like, it's like we need to do a renewal of our vows with our values. So, you know, our focus. So we're almost doing a renewal of that. So it's been 3 years. How are we doing? And even just trying to kind of push ourselves to elevate our focus on it, and not to kind of rest on our laurels and think, oh, we already got that, because you never do. You can lose it in an instant. You can lose an organization's or an individual's trust in one moment. And so you have to kind of stay on your toes with it, you know, really, and keep it at the forefront, and don't let people forget. Don't let the leaders expect what their expectations are, and don't let the organization, the colleagues, the team members think for a second that it's still not top of mind.
You know, I read something this morning on LinkedIn, and it's kind of gone viral. So I'm not sure if either of you have seen it. And I can't remember the name of the company. It began with a V, but what they were talking about was, you know, my daughter asked me the other day, Mom, are we going to go in another pandemic? And, you know,
Yeah.
I was like, well,
gosh, we hope not.
There's some really good chances we're going to be, you know, masking up again, et cetera, et cetera. And with the triple threat of the flu and COVID coming back and RSV and kids, you know, this company, what I read that, so what's getting really hard hit are families at this time. And so they've started two of the things that I remember. The first one is a DoorDash. So when your kids get sick, they provide you with DoorDash vouchers to bring food in, you know, for the other kids, because obviously someone's taking care of a child and they're sick. And another part of it was an employee resource group with their own Slack channel for parents to sort of share, like, what are you doing? How are you doing this? And, you know, I thought that was, you know, we can fatigue on having to keep providing. I thought that was a really interesting reminder that we are still sort of in the cycle. And to your point, a reminder of how to ensure that we are maintaining our focus.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I don't know. I don't think it's the same article, but I've read a couple about this, like a focus on caregivers and the kind of stress and pressure of families and caregiver, and so in so many ways. We've gotten a lot of feedback around mental health resources, and an ask for mental health resources that, like, people are having a really hard time, you know, finding therapists for themselves, for their children, for family members. You know, our benefit coverage and insurance, you know, we have an EAP program, and we also, you know, have benefits around mental health. But, you know, again, just kind of working with the funds that we have and we're self-insured. Some of the we really started to look. We couldn't just say, okay, well, I mean, the organization was asking for help with this, so, you know, the team went away. We found a great provider that has more of a focus on wellness and offers additional mental health services. And we figured out a way by, you know, looking into our, you know, our claims data, from the past 2 years around mental health services, assuming that we'd have some savings there. Anyway, we worked through it and think that it's actually going to be a savings for us in the long run. But we brought in a new provider. That's obviously there's a fee associated with it, but it's an example of kind of what you're talking about. Like we have to stay creative. We have to look at things. We can't just say like, okay, we all have to go and ask finance for, resources and support sometimes, but, get creative. There's ways to, work with what you already have, if you have anything at all, across the board, whether it's communication, engagement, some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion things I shared that are free, or, looking at something like we did with mental health services and figuring out a way that we can bring in a more robust support that's more than just what they'd get by, trying to find a therapist and going at it. It's more holistic. So, I think it's going to evolve. I really hope it's not another pandemic, but it feels to me the ripple effect of the pandemic, we're still in big waves from it. And I don't see that settling the pond down, anytime soon. I think it'll be, quite some time that we'll still be dealing with, kind of the after effect of that on many levels. Social,
sure.
economic, you can name it.
Mm-hmm.
So Becky, I love your commitment and your focus to putting the people first and not losing sight of it yourself and not allowing your organization to lose sight of it. And I'm sure that's a true testament to why you've been able to do the things that you've been able to do. So that's awesome. One of the questions Holly and I always love to ask is, what's a belief that you held at the beginning of your career that's changed for you?
It's changed. I think it all centers around confidence.
Mm-hmm.
So early in my career, my belief was I didn't belong at the table. If I'm like really candid, like I can put myself in a number of positions, like dating back, a decade and more. And I just was always sitting at the table feeling like I wasn't supposed to be there. I didn't have anything to say that anyone would want to have. I would never, kind of put my voice out there. I, was very reserved in, sharing my thoughts and my opinions. And that belief has changed. And it's not so much, vavoom, I'm all of a sudden this like fantastic. It's just that, if I could go back to myself at those points in time and somehow gotten, my more like insecure self to just put those thoughts on that they were there. My thoughts then were there too. They really like that hasn't really changed. I would do anything to do that because one would have felt a lot more comfortable than, the pain I put myself through. But two, it just would have felt like I could be, my natural self. And there, I think if there's anything you can do, it's like try to find an organization, a place, a team, a person where that you can be your authentic self. And then, you're kind of on the right path. And it took me too long to get there in my earlier career. I thought I had to be somebody else for a very long time. And I actually tell this story sometimes. So my early career, I worked in consulting. I worked for Accenture. And I had to be professional Becky, not, personal Becky, that, everything that happens outside the four walls of work. So when I worked for Accenture, I was Rebecca Smith at the time, but I was Rebecca Smith. And nobody called me Rebecca. Like nobody did. My dad, maybe when he was upset with me when I was younger, but like nobody called me Rebecca, but I was Rebecca. And everybody at work called me Rebecca because that was my professional persona. And I was going to be Rebecca Smith. And I remember when I was changing jobs and I left Accenture, I was starting to work at QVC. I had this panic moment, actually in the shower, week or two before I was joining, whatever it was. I was like, oh my gosh, my email address cannot be Rebecca because then they're not going to call me Becky. And so I remember running downstairs and firing off an email, wanting to like begging and pleading, can my email address please be Becky? Like, I know I want to be myself at work. And there's just other, that's a funny story, but there's, other moments along the way where you kind of get closer and closer to just being yourself completely. And and I would say that was a significant and evolving change from the start of my career to now.
And what a
now
gift.
I just go gamble with Holly sometimes.
Yeah. Right.
Did we even talk about that?
Let's talk about that.
It's truly a gift to be able to be yourself at work.
Yeah,
I mean,
we
know we bring our whole selves, but to really bring our authentic selves and just to be able to be
everything. It's everything.
And I'm sure that's showing up in how you're leading, right? And what you're doing for the organization. And that's a huge part of it. So that's awesome.
Thank you.
Becky, thank you so much for your time. I filled a complete 2-sided piece of paper with little notations and notes. And
well, we can talk anytime. So,
and I will. Trust me, I will. Thank you so much. I think we've got some great information for our listeners, and all the best to you in 2023.
Thank you. Thank you both. I hope you have a wonderful holiday. Great.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
Bye, Becky. Thank you for listening. We hope you got a ton of value out of this episode.
Before we go, we want to thank the sponsor of our show, the Mid-Atlantic Employers Association, more commonly referred to as MEA. MEA provides human resources services to hundreds of businesses across numerous industries every day, bridging gaps that restrain innovation and growth.
If you need support around people issues, reach out to meainfo.org. Better people, better outcomes.